Welcome to episode 187 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. Today's episode is all about motivating others and incentives at work with Kurt Nelson. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Dr. Kurt Nelson, one of the co-hosts of Behavioral Grooves, as well as the president and founder of the Lantern Group. We have a fun little chat about our history together at the beginning of the show, so I'm not going to recap or give too much here. Just know before we get too far in that to get in contact with Kurt, find related past episodes of this podcast and Behavioral Grooves, books we talk about, and more, check out the show notes for the episode, which are waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/187. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. The freebie for this episode is the first chapter of my award-winning book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And if you already have the book, in which case, thank you, you'll also be automatically added to the list when you get your copy of the free PDF companion workbook. Both are housed in our free behavioral economics community called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. There's a link to join that global community in those show notes as well. All right, let's get started. Dr. Kurt Nelson, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Melina, thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
I know. We have known each other for what feels like forever in the best possible way. And when we were connecting recently, where I had you and Tim come in to do a session in my group, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, we were talking and I said, why have we not had you on the podcast yet? And I hope you didn't feel slighted. It was not intentional to...
You know, you had Tim and then there was no invitation for me. And I just, I was crying pretty much every night. So, it was there. Yeah.
I believe it. And I'm such a jerk because I've been on Behavioral Grooves twice. Maybe it was like 1 for 1 and then I had to wait.
No harm, no foul. You're good. You're good. But I am really excited to be here because you have some great conversations and that's what I love.
Thank you. I love being... Every time I get to talk to you and or Tim is so delightful. And I'm very, very excited to have you here as well. And apologies to the entire world that it took so long, but you're here now. And if you can tell the audience, for those who have not yet discovered the awesomeness that is Behavioral Grooves and the Lantern Group, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
So great. I am a behavioral scientist. I have a PhD in IO psychology. So actually, the psychology side of behavioral science is mine, but it's more on an organizational perspective and been working in this field for 20 plus years and understanding human behavior and why people do what they do. And as such, have a company that works mostly with organizations and working on internal application of behavioral science into employee programs, mostly around employee motivation, employee engagement, bringing that insight into communications on that side. So internal communications with their employees. How do you improve that and apply those behavioral science principles to make sure that their behavior is actually being changed? And then, as you said, Behavioral Grooves is a side project, which is much bigger than a side project these days, that I do with Tim Houlihan, who is the co-host with me. And we are like you, we get to interview some really cool people and talk behavioral science, which is always the highlight of our week. So
I bet that I love getting to chat with people and hear more about what they're working on and have those good conversations. And I feel like Well, I don't know that I was going to say we should have a brief music chat to allude to the grooves, but I guess that's more Tim than Kurt. Yeah.
I will tell you. So I don't know if Tim talked to you about this when he was on. I can't remember. I listened to that episode, but it's so long ago,
been a
and
while.
I've been, and I was so upset of not being in there. I just kind of blocked it out. No, but so it started off. It was really crazy, this whole music piece, because first off, Tim and I had started Behavior Grooves on a whim. It was more of this, like, he left his job. We knew each other. We said, we need to do something together. And what we did was we said, oh, let's do a meetup. We actually sat down. We were walking through, do we do this? Do we do that? And then we said, let's do a meetup locally here. We're both in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we did that. We did the first one. We had 25, 30 people show up. And then the second one, we had James Heyman, who had co-authored an article with Dan Ariely, A Tale of Two Markets, a fantastic article. And we're realizing we're going to get 25 or 30 people there. And we're going, wow, this needs to be to a larger audience. And then I had just done a radio show interview, and Tim is a recording artist. He actually has multiple albums underneath his belt. And so we said, oh, well, why don't we just do a podcast, and we'll just, record him before he comes in different pieces. And as we're doing that, Tim, in the very end of that interview with James, said, so what's on your playlist? And tell me about the music that you're listening to. And I'm like going, what are you doing, Tim? This is like a behavioral science podcast. What are you asking music questions? And he's like going, afterwards, we kind of, after I gave him this inquisitive look, and he looks at me and we're like, what's going on? Afterwards, he's going, it's behavioral grooves, like jamming on music. And I go, no, it's grooves, like the grooves in your brain when you get in habits and formation. And so we had very different ideas on the name. Anyway, that was a long story to just say Tim is the music guy, but I have been converted. I do think that the music part has been actually really fun.
I love it. I think it's a good, so I too, while I don't have albums, I too am a musical person. I'm a vocalist versus I wish I could play instruments. That is not something I have a skill in. Even when I was in a band and they're like, Lena, we just need you to play. Okay, this is like a stretch. Play the tambourine while you're while you're singing this particular line. And it was on like a downbeat. And I was like, it's not going to happen.
Well, at least you have the vocal part, because I have neither the vocal nor the instrument part. So I am negative on both of those.
But I do think it's a fun icebreaker, even though, so you guys keep the music question until the end.
We do. And what's interesting is we've been doing this now 260 plus episodes. And so it's interesting how people respond to it. And this has been one of the fascinating things. It opens up doors with some people that we just go down these rabbit holes that are just fascinating, not only about their history and their background, but also sometimes insights into human behavior and how music plays parts into that, and how you do use it at work or not use it at work in different pieces. And then others, it's just like, it's a cut and dry kind of thing. And no, I don't really talk about that, and it doesn't really matter. So it's been fascinating, because there's not usually that middle ground. There is either that deep dive or it's a quick conversation.
Yeah, that's funny. Or, the people that legitimately only listen to the NPR talk radio, sports, whatever, that's like all they listen to where like, I don't listen to music. I think, but even like when you're a kid, do you have, I remember as a kid, back in the day, audience, where, before we had these amazing things like Spotify and being able to grab music, where you had to like lay next to your boom box that had the ability you'd be listening to the radio and it's your favorite song coming on, and you'd have to hit record really fast to try to get the beginning of the song so you could listen to it again later if it wasn't available on tape, or you would record the radio playing while you were at school during the day so you could come back and see like, oh man, did I catch my favorite tunes, that you could listen to them later. And I know, of course, there's records getting the grooves and things back, which I had said, so not to only jam on music stuff, but I think Abbey Road is the greatest album ever.
Oh,
That's my fave. I love Abbey Road. It's got good mashups. I'm a huge Beatles fan anyway.
have you seen the Beatle documentary?
Okay, so I've seen McCartney 321, which is
Okay.
fantastic. I have not yet seen Get Back, but I will have seen it by the time this comes out. For sure. I will make sure to watch it. But I think it's from when we were recording that came out just a couple days ago. So I haven't.
A couple of weeks, I think, but
don't judge me, Kurt.
Well, it's okay. No, it's okay.
Me.
I've only seen part one. There's 3 parts, but it is just a fascinating insight into the creative flow and juices of how this works. And what was fascinating, at least for me, and this is again just seeing part 1 of the 3-part thing, is how these 4 people came together and bring, their own insights, but then like get into some arguments over this and like, the personality places that go and then like, the people that I thought would be more vocal are less vocal and different. It's just fascinating. It's again, a deep dive from a psychological perspective into the Beatles. It's just amazing to watch.
I love it. Love it. So I have been like back burner working on an article for a while, which hopefully I will make sure that it's out somewhere by the time this episode comes out so we can link to it. But it's been like ruminating since I watched McCartney 321 like this last summer when it came out, and I knew this already, but that the Beatles can't read music. They never could. Paul McCartney still doesn't read.
Paul McCartney and John can't. I don't know about
right.
George and Ringo might.
So like right. But I know for sure Paul, right? And like you said, John. And so it's this like thought about expertise being overrated. And so in the case of so many pieces on albums and things where they're talking about things that they wanted that those who had knowledge of the instrument specifically would say it doesn't go that high. And it's like, well, couldn't it? Right. The piccolo trumpet can't do that. Like, but what if it could? Can you just try it? Right. And coming up with these new opportunities and spaces, like innovation is so possible when you aren't totally fixated on just that very narrow expertise. We get some, functional fixedness in there for sure. But I don't know if you have expanding thoughts on that or anything, but
no, I think you're absolutely right. This idea that sometimes we get constrained by our own knowledge, right? And that the idea of not knowing allows you to be more expansive in your thoughts about what could be, as opposed to saying, well, no, we know that it's been done. It's been looked at. It's been tested 20 times. And the reality is that, oftentimes it's those expansive thoughts that we get, those ideas that are just so off the wall that they may not work themselves, but they lead us to other ideas that might work because you're anchoring, right? You're anchoring yourself at a point that is way far out there as opposed to limiting. It's the idea of, shoot for the stars and at least you'll hit the moon. And the whole concept of saying, well, if we can't even get to the moon, if we have that preset mind of we can't get to the moon, you're not even going to get anywhere close to that. So it's like, why can't we get to the stars? And if we can't get to the stars, well, then how far can we get? And I think that's a really important piece. And I think it's really interesting, at least in the work that we're doing with organizations, is people get limited not only by the expertise, but by their history. So we're working a lot with VPs of sales and VPs of HR and marketing. And when we're talking about motivating people, they're limited by, well, this is how I was motivated. When I was in that position, I was motivated in this way. And that might have been 5 years ago. It might have been 10 years ago. It might have been 20 years ago. And the world has moved on. The world has changed. And also it's an N of one. I mean, how you as an individual are motivated versus how the vast majority of people are motivated, maybe 100% degree, not 180 degrees different than how many people are motivated. And that's always one of the biggest challenges that we have in working with organizations is getting past that status quo bias, getting past that history of here is how it worked for me and therefore it should work for everybody.
Right. Yeah. The golden rule versus the platinum rule or whatever, right? Where they say that like treat others as you want to be treated versus treating others the way they want to be treated, which is a seemingly simple cliche now reframe, but one that is very important. Like you said, it's your experience is an N of one. And for those who don't work in statistics and any sort of research thing, that's, N being your sample size. So you have a sample size of one in this case. And so you can't possibly be representative of the entire population in that way. And it would be silly to assume that you were.
Exactly. And even those who that N of one might be representative of whatever they experienced in their lifetime. But the interesting piece about business, about the world, is that it is constantly evolving. It is constantly shifting and changing. And so what worked last year may not be the same thing that works this year. And it's the context part that you've talked about. I know, so something that Tim and I talk about all the time is the context changes. And the context changes if it's from company A to company B, but it also changes from year one to year two. It changes from department A to department B. And so this is what the wonderful part of behavioral science is that behavioral science says we need to take that context into consideration, and that the intervention that you used a year ago or in company A or in department B may not work in this, but let's understand what are some of the factors behind that and say, well, it might work because of these things, or let's be looking at these other aspects of this in order to make sure that it is the appropriate way of addressing whatever the issue is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have talked about, I want to have one more side diversion before we get to the meat of motivation and things inside of companies. And I know that I get asked all the time about podcasting tips. I am sure that you do as well. And, been on panels and we've done sessions and things talking about this all the time. So as far as I know, I, for one, am very jealous that you have a co-host. I wish I would have gone in with a co-host. I think it makes it so much easier. But all that being said, with your, more than 200 episodes now, what are some just top podcasting tips or advice for anyone who's thinking about starting a podcast or improving one they have? What would you say for those people?
So you bring up a co-host, and I think co-hosts work if you have a clear understanding and respect for each other. I think there are so many times where we could have gone down off a cliff, right? If we didn't have that respect and we didn't have that admiration for each other's ability in different pieces, but also an understanding of who's going to be doing what and what are their roles, and understanding, my God, Tim does the vast majority of the work on the podcast. I will tell everybody that to the day I die, because he just has the ability to be able to do all the post-production and all of that, which I do not have. He likes that and he takes it on. And I'm eternally grateful for that. So if you're starting a podcast and you're thinking of doing it with a co-host or co-host, make sure that you guys understand what your roles are going to be, how that division of labor is going to work. Make sure that you also have some kind of respect and admiration for the other person, because there's so many times where you could just go down that really bad rabbit hole and then you never come out of it. With that, I think the other pieces just from learning about this is consistency is key. It can be really difficult sometimes to just go, I got to get this done. And it's Friday night at, 8 PM and you're tired and you want to go to bed or go off and see your family. But, consistency is key. And then, shut up and if you're having a guest, shut up and let the guest talk as much as, this is something I'm still learning, because as you can tell, I talk a lot, but yeah.
This is the battle for words. But like you said, the guest is there to talk. And so I will shut up in 1 second where I have a point. So I will say that, being a little facetious there, but this idea that,
your guest is there because you want them there and they have something to say. But that doesn't diminish how important your point of view is as the host. And particularly if it's a podcast like this, like you have some expertise, you have some insight and maybe a perspective to bring on something. That's the same as Tim and me. When we're talking with somebody, we will hopefully bring a different angle to something, particularly, and we do this all the time, right? We interview the same people because they're on their book tour, they're on their, little tour to get everything done. And so they're on 10, 15, 20, 50 podcasts. And, your role is to say, what are you doing that is going to be something that is a little bit different than anybody else? How are you bringing a unique perspective to this story that they're telling and asking them the right question, or as I pontificate sometimes, that pontificating on something that maybe elucidates something else. So that's another thing. And again, I'm talking way, way too much, but
no, it's your job here.
I'm the guest here. Yeah, there you go.
It's the Kurt show. You get to talk as much as you want.
Oh, and everybody's going to tune out if it's the Kurt show. There you go.
No, I was just going to say that I've had shows before too. I think when you do have a co-host, to not get where it was somebody I really liked, I'm super excited. And then the co-hosts were having like an inside joke, laughing for way too long of them talking about something that's about them. And remember, at the end of the day, it's about the audience and making sure they're going to get what is intended out of the interview or your conversation. And that, you two can jibber jabber and have fun, offline. don't let, it's okay to have a little bit of a laugh, but you have to bring the audience in to part of those jokes and things.
I fully agree. Right.
So let's talk about motivation and incentives and things within businesses. I've asked Kurt to do a guest lecture in my class on internal communication and change management at Texas A&M, which is opening up like as this episode comes out, but there's still time for you to enroll and come in. And if you're listening to this later, it's a core piece of curriculum. So, expect that it'll come back around. So Kurt, what can you share with us on the work you do for motivating employees and change and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I do focuses in on, again, applying a behavioral science lens inside of organizations, mostly with salespeople, but with employees in general, and trying to help the company understand what are the drivers of that employee's behavior and the motivation behind that behavior. And with that, we do a lot of work and kind of just doing a behavioral audit, going in and trying to understand what are those factors. So again, we talked about context earlier. So what is the context that these behaviors are taking place in? What are the incentives and pay components in your total rewards context? And what are those factors and how are they driving the specific behaviors that we are seeing? Not that we're expecting, but the ones that we are seeing, because what we are expecting or what is anticipated by putting an incentive program in place isn't always what is the behavior that is an outcome of that. In addition to that, you have to look at the social components within an organization. You got to look at the networks and who gets information from where, who trusts who, all of those factors. And so you bring all of that into the work of trying to understand, all right, we need employees to go and do X, and they're not doing that. And we think they should be based upon all these factors that we have in place. So why aren't they? What is the friction point that is going in place? What are the lack of motivation that is there? Where are there opportunities to do some simple things, but also maybe designing an entire incentive scheme, relooking at how the recognition programs work. And so all of that comes into play. And then one of the big things that we found, and so this wasn't originally the way that, so the Lantern Group is my company, and we were initially designed around like understanding the behavior part of this. And what we really quickly realized is that a big gap is almost always the communication that comes around this. And that you can have the best incentive plan, the best total rewards structure in place, all these things that everybody goes, wow, this is fantastic. I really love this. But if people don't understand it or they don't buy into it, which is a big piece of what we try to do with our communication work, is saying you're missing a big opportunity and you're not going to get the leverage that you have from whatever the investment is from an organization putting that in place. So that's it. And we take a behavioral science perspective on the communication side. So it's looking at how are you communicating your message? What is the behavior that you want out of that? And what are those elements that you're bringing into place? How are you putting priming in place? How are you framing the message? Are you framing it as a loss or as a gain? Are you building in images? And how are those images being used? All of those come into play as you're thinking through the communication. How are you chunking information? Are you not making sure you're not cognitively overloading the people with all of this information? How are you staggering that? How are you building upon those different pieces? All of that. So it's fun. It's a really interesting because every organization is different and you're dealing with people and they're always new and exciting things to learn.
Yeah. So I, of course, as you're talking, I'm like, yep, agree. Like, talk about these things all the time. I'm totally on board. This, we're kindred in all those ways. Do you have, knowing that, of course, we live in an NDA fueled world, but do you have any examples for people that's kind of generally what you do, but ones that can be shared that saying, someone came with this problem and this is what we did. And I know, in our little pre-chat, you were mentioning, some like how things are different in pandemic times. And so whether you want to go in that like virtual issue or you want to talk about stuff from before or, what you see on the horizon, again, it is the Kurt show, so you can choose whatever you want to.
Whoa! I'm sorry, people. You're going to be bored out of your mind for the next 10 minutes. There you go. Let me tell two. I'll tell one that's an old one. I can actually use the company name. We presented at a couple different conferences, co-presented with one of the executives that was there, and so it was with Eli Lilly, a large pharmaceutical based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And they were revamping their total rewards program. And so what they had realized is that their incentive and total rewards had not changed for like 6, 7, 8 years. And yet their business had changed and where they were driving to, right? So the way that they were going to market, the behaviors that they needed to see from their sales representatives had all changed. And yet their incentive plan was really stuck back 8 to 10 years from in the past. And so we went in and we did a pretty intensive audit where we interviewed sales reps from across all the divisions and different pieces. We got focus groups together. We did surveys. And from that, we really looked at what are the current programs in place and what are the behaviors that they're driving. And what was really interesting from that is that they had some pieces that were really working. And what was really interesting is that the executives, those were some of the pieces that they were trying to get rid of because they were costly. They had a whole bunch of other factors going into them. Anyway, long story short is when we came back and we made these recommendations, we added in, there was some elements about they had an incentive program that had been designed to have competition between people, and they were going for a more team collaborative approach. And so we had some of that we maintained, but we also added in collaborative pieces of this. And so their incentive plan had a team component within it, had a business component within it, and it had a customer component within it. And all of those then, move the needle in order to get that organization to where the behaviors that the incentive plan and the rewards programs were driving aligned with the company's strategy. And for the next 4 or 5 years, we modified that a little bit. But as James said about this, he said, without that, we would have had we had growth that was well beyond what was expected. And we hit our goal every year. Can't put that all on the incentives, obviously, but he said that a big component of that was there. So that was the first story. The second one goes back to what you were just talking about. So the pandemic has been a really game changer for many organizations and just how they're trying to interact with their employees, B, the way that they're motivating them and the behaviors that they need to be thinking about, particularly as it deals with salespeople, and how do you get sales if you can't see your customer? And, you're now telemarketing basically, as opposed to being in front of person, in front of your client. So all of those factors, and then you layer onto that the great resignation that's going on and how people engage in various different pieces. And it's just a really interesting piece. And we've been working with a couple companies on that massive turnover. And so within those companies, how are we working with the executive level messaging around what they're trying to achieve and where people can feel that engagement? And again, applying some of this from the perspective of, we need to address the stress that people are under. You need to really understand that you have to treat your employees as humans. And so we've actually put together a leading human workbook as part of the work that Tim and I have done with Behavioral Grooves, which really focuses in on understanding what can you do as a manager in order to allow that human centeredness of your employees to really be there, and that you're bringing in psychological safety components, that you're bringing in this element of listening, that you're bringing in this element of care and empathy and concern, that, for many people, it's not easy. And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have moving forward. There's been a lot of work within organizations on safety protocols and a variety of other factors of bringing people back into the office. What hasn't been discussed is, what are the psychological pieces of bringing people back into the office, or not bringing people back into the office, or having a hybrid model? And how do you have, if you have people in the office and you have people in hybrid, we know behavioral science tells us that the prime jobs and the promotions and people are going to be more with the people that are in the office generally, because you have the mere exposure effect. You see them every day as opposed to the people who are working from home. So how do you combat that? How do you address that? And those are all factors that we're working with at this point.
Yeah, I am going to link for everybody. So Gleb Sapersky came on to here. I'm not sure if you had him talk about return to work and hybrid and remote team stuff, but he was here. By the time this comes out, it'll be a few months back, talking about some of that. So for some of those tips as well, I'll make sure to link to that episode with Gleb. Really great insights there. And when you were talking about the incentives from the first example, so that doesn't change. It becomes so much more important and apparent when people are remote, I would say, of understanding the incentives that people have. And there's the product side, there's teams. Like, aligning incentives is such a critical thing that people overlook, because you have maybe siloed departments and say, like, these people are motivating this team and these people are motivating this team and these ones are motivating customers to do stuff. And you just don't think about how they might be competing with one another and how they might be going against your goals. I know from when I was at the credit union eons ago, it feels like these days. But we had, we're looking at appealing to a younger demographic, and we had really, as is still, I work with a lot of financial institutions that have very complex loyalty programs with way too many things going on, and trying to get those incentives in line. But, one of the biggest benefits from the checking account, so we're looking to appeal to a younger demo. And the big thing that you got, which cost a lot of money, was a free box of checks. And this was not long enough ago that was useful, right? Like, like, how many people, listening, like, when's the last time you had to write a check for something? It's not something we do all that often anymore. And and it was, a thing where you'd say, well, we can't get rid of this because, a lot of people like and rely on the free box of checks. It's like, but they're not the people that we're trying to appeal to anymore. Like you were saying in the Eli Lilly, like, it was, built on something from 10, 20 years ago. That's not the world we're in now. And even though there is a demographic maybe that appreciates that, if that's not who you're looking to be appealing to moving forward, then you got to be okay with some of those people leaving. And I know in this, where we're talking about internal stuff, it's different, sort of, especially in a time of great resignation. And, if people aren't the right fit, there is a little bit of making it to where it's okay if they choose to move on. So you can get people that are the right fit, both as customers and as team members.
Yeah, you bring up a couple really important pieces there. One is making sure that alignment to what you're trying to do, and the fact that alignment means that you might have to exclude a certain group of people. And that's difficult for everybody because we all go, oh, we want to be all embracing. And well, no, you can't, because that's not where you're doing. We've done some work on just developing or re-looking at incentive compensation or total reward philosophies as well, which is a fascinating exploration into organizations, because you start talking about the philosophy. So you're not talking about the specific incentives, but what do you need the incentives or your total rewards to do for a company? And then aligning that with where do you see the company going in 3 to 5 years? And what the outcome of that oftentimes is that you have vastly different perceptions of where the company is going, where the company currently is, all of those factors that come into play. And so it's an exploration around incentives, but it really is an exploration around the future of the organization and kind of the strategy that the organization is going. And within that, then it's like, yeah, so let's just get the philosophy aligned around where you want to go before we even start to think about the specifics of how your rewards and recognition and communication and all of those factors go into place. Because if you don't have that, man, you're going to be really hard pressed to get something that really works.
Well, I think that brings it really full circle to even where you were talking about when you and Tim were going to start behavioral grooves, and you had a conversation and you're both like excited about grooves, and you were thinking about a completely different association of the word. And then the other one is saying like, no, it's grooves like music grooves. Yeah. No, it's like grooves, like brain, like grooves. What are you talking about? Right. And I'm sure you had more than one conversation about the name and where it was coming from before you go in and you're recording. And then Tim is having this conversation. You're like, what are you doing, bro? Like, that's not what we're doing here. And how often does that happen in businesses where we think, of course, we're on the same page. Everybody's got to be thinking this. And there are so many different perspectives that didn't even come into your brain. And again, with that N of one, when you're your own sample size and you don't take the time to have those conversations and really get into what may feel like minutia and being okay with, I feel like sometimes we're worried that if, we have this conversation, it might be like someone's thinking you're insulting their intelligence by making them explain how they're interpreting this conversation. But if you don't take that time, this is also why, for business stuff, contracts are important, not just for protecting oneself if things go sideways, but it's also to make sure that we're really talking about the same thing, that we're putting it onto paper. Like, I'm going to do this and you are going to do this, and this is how long it's going to take. And we're not doing that. If you don't take that time, there's so much vagueness and possible other associations, like we said, even with a word like grooves, that you could be going in different directions. Well,
and to that point, I think you bring up a good aspect of this, which is people worry about what others are going to think, and I know this is I talk about like bringing in consultants, and sometimes consultants are brought in just to prove, to reflect what the person already wants to do. And, people view that as bad. And I think oftentimes it is. I'm not going to say that it's not, right? It's not, we're not going in just to get your program or your program de jour out the door and doing it. But sometimes having that outside perspective, you can ask those questions. You can ask the minutiae questions that other people would like, why are you asking me this? Are you questioning my intent or my intelligence or whatever? But if you're an outside person, you can ask those questions because you're an outside person. And that unlocks a lot of insight for people. And so it's one of the factors that I do think there's a real value in bringing somebody in who isn't part of the organization to do some of this work, because they can ask those tough questions. They can point out kind of hypocrisies within the organization. They can say, look, you're saying this, but you're doing this, and they are two extremely opposite things. If you want A, but you're doing Z, you are going to never get to A. And they're going, wow, but you can be that devil's advocate. You can be the voice of kind of dissent within the room and not fear that you're going to be ruining your relationship long-term with them. So there's some aspects there that I think are really important.
Yeah. And like double full circle, that's our value of not having as much expertise, right? Like that you're able to come in and ask, see, these always come around. We put a little bow on it here at the end and can tie it all back. So as we close the show, for everyone who is super interested to learn more about you, the Lantern Group, behavioral groups, like what's the best next step for them to take? What should we be linking to in the show notes for them to find and connect with you?
Well, obviously, if you want to listen to more of this kind of talk with a musically inclined person like you, but one that does music, you can listen to behavioral groups, and so find that on any of the pod places that you do. And then obviously behavioralgroups.com is a place where you can go out and find that as well. And then if you're interested in talking, just business stuff, I'm happy to sit down and talk with anybody. You can reach me on Twitter at Motivation Guru, or you can just Kurt@lanterngroup.com. So I'm happy to take questions from anybody and just share. This is, like I said, I have fun talking about this stuff. So that's always good.
For sure. And just as a reminder for listeners, you can like rewind 10 seconds or whatever if you need to get Kurt's email to save the spammy inboxness of my guests. I won't type that out onto a website anywhere, but you get it for listening, that you can go, pop back and grab that. So, and we'll definitely make sure to link just to the Lantern Group website so people can find that as well. So thank you so much again, Kurt, for joining me on the show. As always, it was delightful to chat with you, and I'm sad it took so long, but it's perfect. It was the right timing.
It was right, and it worked out. And thank you, Melina. This is always excited to be here. It's like an honor. I'm feeling like all glowy over everything. It's all cool.
I love it. Brainy goodness, of course. So thanks again, Kurt, and we'll talk soon. Thank you again to Dr. Kurt Nelson for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? We didn't really talk about it on today's episode, but Tim and Kurt of Behavioral Grooves came into the Be Thoughtful Revolution in November of 2021 to do a 90-minute live training and Q&A with the group where they dug in on how to motivate yourself and others. They gave great examples with slides and articles and research, and it was a fantastic conversation. So if you found this interesting and want to hear more from Kurt and his counterpart, Tim, join my free community of behavioral economics enthusiasts from around the world called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. There is a replay there for you, along with lots of other great content and information. And as you know from last week's episode, content is my word of the year. And so throughout the year, I'm going to be working on updating and making it really easily searchable and useful, valuable, well collaborated stuff there within the Be Thoughtful Revolution. So I'm really excited for that and would love any of your insights and things that you would love to hear and see from me. So whenever you're listening, feel free to reach out to me either there within the Be Thoughtful Revolution or on any of the socials. You can find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere to let me know what content you would love to see from the Brainy business in 2022 and beyond. The plan is to continue doing live calls and trainings through the year within the Be Thoughtful Revolution. So be on the lookout for notifications of those. Once you've joined, you can get all of those updates. As a quick reminder before we wrap up, there are links for you to connect with Kurt, join the Be Thoughtful Revolution, check out books and past episodes related to or mentioned on the show within the show notes for the episode. And that's all waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/187. And as we talked a little about the certificate program through the Human Behavior Lab at Texas A&M University, I wanted to remind you that I do teach there, and we have classes going on all throughout the year toward that certificate in applied behavioral economics. So whenever you're listening to this, if you want to get a more official education in applied behavioral economics without needing to change careers and get a PhD to become an academic researcher or something along those lines, come check out our program. There is, of course, a link for you in the show notes. And as I said, we have classes all the time. So regardless of when you're listening, come check it out. You can go directly to HBL, like Human Behavior Lab, TAMU, like Texas A&M University, .edu, and click on certificate program. Again, that's hbl.tamu.edu and click on certificate program, or there's that easy link for you in the show notes. And if you do join us for internal communication and change management in January 2022, Kurt will be doing one of the guest lectures. There are a couple of other amazing ones lined up. You won't want to miss them, and the other content from this 10-week virtual course. I look forward to seeing you from wherever you are in the world there soon. Thank you again to Kurt Nelson for joining me on the show today. As always, it was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Next week, Alina Hallinan is here and shares something for the very first time. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.